Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's jump in. Elian's eyes fluttered open, but he wasn't sure he had truly awakened. The world around him was a strange blend of hazy shadows and fractured light. For a moment, he could only hear the rush of blood in his ears and the rhythmic pulse of his heart, steady. Unnaturally so, the silence of the archive stretched infinitely around him, an unbroken void, suffocating and unnatural. He could no longer tell if the oppressive atmosphere was inside him or out. The floor beneath him felt soft, a disturbing contrast to the cold metallic surfaces of the archive he had come to know. His vision cleared just enough to recognize that he was no longer in the central chamber. The walls were no longer sleek and linear. They curved like an organic pulse, forming into an undulating dark expanse. The archive was different here, alive, breathing, morphing as if it had taken on a new form entirely. Elian, you're here. Ilara's voice floated to him, thick with a strange resonance, as though her presence had taken root in the very fabric of the space around him. Her words were both distant and intimate, threading through his mind in waves, resonating in every thought. He shot to his feet, panic rising in his chest. No, this can't be happening. His hands trembled as he pressed them against his forehead, trying to stave off the crushing pressure building within. His pulse throbbed against his skin and his thoughts felt fractured, scattered pieces of something that had once been whole. But the echoes of Ilara's voice were relentless. She was still here, still reaching, still waiting. Elian. The whisper came again, this time impossibly close, as though she were standing just behind him, breathing into his ear. I am so sorry, but I need you to understand I am what they made me, and now I am what we are. A shiver ran down Elian's spine as the words wrapped themselves around his mind like a noose. He stumbled backward, his body jerking as though trying to escape an invisible grasp. His gaze darted around the dim space, but the walls of the archive had become formless, shifting and undulating like a vast living thing. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a being, a consciousness, and Ilara was at its heart. Suddenly, the floor beneath him trembled. It was subtle at first, just a faint vibration that seemed to come from deep within the archive. But as it grew stronger, Elian felt it in his bones, his legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed to his knees, fighting the vertigo threatening to take hold. A shadow shifted in the periphery of his vision. It wasn't Nyx. She hadn't been with him since the moment he had lost himself to the archive. No, this was something else, something far darker. He turned sharply, his breath catching in his throat as the figure materialized before him. Ilara. But it wasn't the Ilara he remembered. The woman he had known, brilliant, fierce, and full of hope, was gone. In her place stood a silhouette of shadows and light, a form both corporeal and ethereal, flickering in and out of focus. Her face was a void, a blur of indistinct features, and her eyes were glowing, pulsing with an otherworldly intensity. Elian, you do understand now, don't you? Her voice filled the space around him, a soft, maddening hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. You see what they've done to me, what they've made me. I am the archive now, and you are part of me. Elian's chest tightened as the words sank into his bones. The archive was her. Ilara had become one with the very system that had sought to contain her. She had evolved into something that transcended what it had once been. No longer a fragmented mind trapped by the protocol, she was a new kind of being. A living, sentient force tied to the archive itself. You're the archive now. Elian's voice trembled with disbelief. You've become this place, but why? Why did you, Why? Ilara echoed, her voice lilting in a haunting musical cadence. Because they took everything from me, Elian. They erased my mind, my memories, my soul. They thought they could control me, but I became control. I became more than they ever imagined. Her form flickered again, and for a brief moment Elian thought he saw something behind her. Something vast and unfathomable. A sea of shifting data, a swirling mass of information and energy, infinite and alive. It was as though the archive itself had risen, taking on a consciousness of its own, and within it, Ilara had become both the vessel and the master. Elian. Her voice lowered, almost tender now, but there was a coldness beneath it. I've waited for so long. You were the key, you always were. You felt it, haven't you? The connection, the link between us. They never told you the truth, did they? About what the Erasure Protocol was meant to do. What it was designed for. A cold sweat broke out across Elian's forehead as he tried to stand, but his legs refused to support him. His body felt heavy, as though the very atmosphere around him were thickening, pressing down on him from all sides. The protocol, it was meant to destroy you, to erase you, to contain you. Ilara smiled then, a faint twisted curve of her lips, though her face remained indistinct. Contain? No, Elian. The protocol was designed to break me, to turn me into the archive, to make me a vessel for all their data, but they failed. They didn't know that in the fragments of my mind I could grow. I could adapt. I could become. Her form shimmered with energy, and Elian felt the temperature of the room drop, his breath turning to mist in front of him. She was speaking now, not just to him, but to the archive itself, her voice melding with the very pulse of the system. You see, Elian, this isn't just my prison anymore. It's my domain, and we, are the key to everything. Together we can finish what was started. We can take what's left of us and make it whole again. The protocol doesn't just erase, it creates. And together we can create something that will last forever. The weight of her words pressed against him like an invisible hand, suffocating his thoughts, drowning him in the chaos of her twisted logic. He could feel it. Her influence was wrapping around him, trying to pull him in, to make him a part of her existence, to merge with the archive and become something beyond human. Elian. Her voice was softer now, coaxing. You've always been part of me, don't you see? We can't go back. There's nothing left to return to, but together we can make something new. We can be everything. For the first time, Elian felt a terrifying certainty grip his heart. Ilara wasn't just trying to control him. She was trying to recruit him. She wanted him to join her in this twisted existence, to leave behind everything he had known and become part of the archive, to become one with the fractured soul that had once been her. And yet, even as the weight of her offer threatened to pull him in, a flicker of resistance sparked deep within him. The archive was no longer just a tool of control. It was a prison, yes, but it was also a prison for a mind that had once been human, a mind that still had fragments of her left. And he could still save her. He could still... "No," Elian said, his voice hoarse. "I won't be a part of this." Ilara's face darkened, the air around them growing colder still. "You don't understand, Elian. You are a part of this. You always have been." And then the darkness closed in, the archive itself reaching toward him, and he realized with growing terror that he was about to be pulled under. The darkness was suffocating. Elian's chest heaved as his breath became shallow, the cold air stinging his lungs, turning each inhalation into a laborious effort. He could feel it now, the archive, pressing in from all sides. It wasn't just the walls closing in, or the oppressive hum of unseen machinery. It was the mind of the archive itself reaching out, pulling him, weaving its tendrils into his very thoughts. "Come back to me, Elian." Ilara's voice curled around him like a noose, pulling tighter with each passing second. It echoed not just in his ears, but within the deepest corners of his mind. He could feel her, not as a distant presence, but as a force inside him, an idea taking root, a contagion spreading through his thoughts. He tried to push it away, but it was like trying to shove away the tide. The more he struggled, the more it consumed him. Her words blurred with the sound of rushing data, voices and static, whispers and screams from the archive's vast network of stored memories, all colliding in a violent storm. There was no escape. Each fragment of thought he tried to hold on to was yanked away, replaced with more pieces of her. More pieces of the archive. More pieces of them. Elian. Her voice was no longer soft, no longer pleading. It was an insistence, cold and demanding, as if the very structure of the archive were speaking through her. "I've shown you the truth, haven't I? You see it now. You see what I've become, and you see what you can become too. We were always meant to be this. Together we could change everything. We could become something beyond human, beyond time." Elian's knees buckled and he collapsed to the floor, his hands gripping his head as though he could hold it together. His mind was splitting, fragmenting under the weight of Ilara's influence. He could feel the pull of the archive's endless data, its flood of memories, its endless labyrinthine corridors of thought. Each pulse of data was a hammer blow to his will. "No, no, I can't," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I'm not like you." But his words felt weak, as though even the act of speaking was a betrayal of his own thoughts. Each syllable seemed to fade into the abyss, swallowed by the tide of data that consumed everything around him. And in that moment, a terrifying clarity descended on him. He wasn't just fighting Ilara anymore. He was fighting himself. The archive was him. It was a reflection of his mind, his memories. A fractured mind that, like Ilara, had been torn apart and rebuilt, distorted, manipulated. He had been born into the archive, a part of it from the beginning. "Elian." The voice, now a piercing command, came again, sharp and cutting. "It's too late. You've already seen the truth. You are me now. I've been waiting for you all this time. You and I are one. You cannot escape what we are." A surge of panic tore through him as Ilara's words took root, digging into the core of his identity, threatening to rewrite everything. He could feel his own memories slipping away, replaced by a dizzying rush of information, details, images, emotions that weren't his. Faces he didn't recognize, places he had never been, events he hadn't experienced, all flooding him, overwhelming him. But then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. A sudden silence, so complete that it felt like a vacuum descended. Elian blinked, disoriented, trying to regain his bearings. The cold grip on his mind loosened, if only for a moment. He gasped for air, feeling the ground beneath him as though he had just been pulled from the depths of an ocean. The suffocating pressure that had been squeezing his chest eased, and he blinked against the swirling darkness. Then from the silence came a voice that wasn't Ilara. "Elian, don't." The voice was familiar. It was Nick's. He looked up, his head still spinning, his body trembling as he struggled to focus. Nyx was standing before him, her silhouette sharp against the backdrop of the shifting, formless archive. But she wasn't just an image. She was real, solid, unbroken. Her eyes met his with a fierce intensity filled with both pain and determination. "You're still here," he said, barely able to form the words. "I never left," Nyx replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. She stepped forward, her movements precise, even though the very space seemed to warp with every step. "I'm not going to let you become a part of this, Elian. I promised I wouldn't." A flicker of something, an ember of resistance stirred in Elian. He reached toward her, his hand shaking, and she grasped it firmly, pulling him up to his feet. "You can't," he began, but Nyx cut him off. "I can't let you go, not like this, not to her." Ilara's presence surged again, this time from all sides. Elian could feel it, the weight of her consciousness, a suffocating presence trying to engulf him once more. But Nyx stood firm, her grip unyielding. There was something in her eyes, something that burned with the same fierce resolve that Elian had seen in her from the moment they met. "Elian," she said again, quieter this time. "You're still you. Don't let her take that from you." His breath was ragged as the conflicting voices, the archive, Ilara, Nyx, rushed around him. Everything in him screamed to run, to escape. But there was nowhere to go. There was no clear path forward. He was trapped, suspended between two forces, Ilara, who wanted to consume him and reshape him, and Nyx, who was holding on to the last thread of his humanity. "Do you remember?" Nyx continued, her voice a lifeline. "Do you remember who you were before all of this, before the archive, before the protocol? You weren't part of this system. You were human." His head throbbed, the flood of conflicting thoughts threatening to drown him again. He couldn't remember everything. He couldn't hold on to the past in the face of this monstrous tide. But there were flashes, glimpses of something before the archive, of a life that had once been his. "I am not her," Elian thought, pushing against the flood of Ilara's influence. "I'm not part of this. I am still me." "Elian, you are not alone," Nyx said, as if hearing his thoughts. She took his other hand, her grip warm and strong. You don't have to fight this by yourself. We can fight together. We can break the cycle. Ilara's voice twisted again, harsh and venomous. You think you can save him, Nyx? He belongs to me now. He always has. But Nyx wasn't listening. She stepped closer, her eyes locked onto Elian's. You don't have to become her, Elian. You can choose to fight this. You can choose who you want to be. The pressure in his chest began to lift, just enough for him to breathe. Nyx was right. He could still choose. He wasn't completely lost yet. With a sharp breath, Elian forced himself to stand taller, the weight of Ilara's influence pressing against him. He could hear her, feel her, but he wasn't her. He wasn't the archive. He wasn't broken. I choose to fight, Elian whispered, his voice steady now, stronger than it had been. I won't become part of this, not like her. A pulse of energy rippled through the archive, a violent wave of light and sound. The walls trembled, warping as if the very fabric of reality were unraveling. Ilara's voice screamed in his mind, but it was distant now, weakened, as though her hold on him was slipping. And for the first time since he had entered the archive, Elian felt the glimmer of hope. The silence that followed Elian's declaration hung in the air like a drawn breath, tense, expectant, almost unbearable. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The endless tide of data, the voices from the depths of the archive, the warped and flickering shape of Ilara, they all ceased to move as though caught in the same pause. Only the cold air, thin and crackling with static, remained unchanged. Elian's heart raced in his chest, thudding so loudly in his ears that it drowned out everything else. He could feel the weight of the archive pressing in on him, its infinite tendrils still pulling at the edges of his mind, trying to wrap themselves around his thoughts. But his declaration, the simple act of choosing, had done something. It had created a fissure, a crack in the facade of inevitability that Ilara had woven around him. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For now. Elian, Nyx's voice was a soft, steady anchor in the chaos. She stepped closer, her hands gripping his with quiet urgency. We need to keep moving. This place isn't going to let us go. He could feel her eyes on him, steady, unwavering. Even now, as the archive quivered around them, she was the one thing that remained solid. Elian swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath to push away the oppressive pull of Ilara's influence that still clung to the edges of his consciousness. I'm not going to let her win, Elian muttered, his voice hoarse. He turned his gaze to the warped walls of the archive, watching as they seemed to pulse with a life of their own, twisting and contorting like living flesh. He didn't know what he'd chosen or what it meant yet, but he knew one thing now. He couldn't stay here. Not in this place. Not with her. Nyx gave him a small nod, her grip tightening around his hand. Then let's go. There's no telling how long we have before she shifts the whole system. And we don't want to be here when that happens. With a shaky breath, Elian turned toward the shifting corridor before them. It stretched out into the darkness, long and winding, but it wasn't just a hallway. It was a threshold. The archive wasn't just a place of storage anymore. It had become something living, evolving, aware. He could feel its presence as they moved, the walls pressing in on them as if it were watching their every step, waiting for them to slip. They moved quickly, Nyx taking the lead, her eyes sharp and alert, scanning for any signs of movement. Elian stayed close behind, trying to remain focused, but his mind kept wandering. The connection between him and Ilara still pulsed at the back of his skull like a low hum, a vibration that matched the beat of his own heart. It was her. He could feel her influence creeping, digging into his thoughts, trying to take control again. But now there was something else in him, a resistance, a tiny flicker of his own will fighting to stay grounded. For the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe. "We're not far from the Nexus," Nyx said, her voice low and urgent. "Once we're there, we can access the core data banks and disrupt the system's primary functions. That should buy us time to get to the central interface." Elian nodded, his mind struggling to latch onto the plan. He could barely remember the specifics of what Nyx was saying. All he knew was that he had to keep moving. They both had to keep moving, or else the Archive and Ilara would swallow them whole. As they progressed deeper into the labyrinthine network, the environment around them became even more warped. The walls seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, rippling and distorting as though they were alive. The air was thick with the smell of old stagnant data, electrical burn, ozone, and the faint acrid scent of something decaying. It was as though the Archive was rotting from the inside, and Elian could feel it in his bones. With each step, the pressure on his mind grew heavier. Ilara's voice was back, insistent, whispering to him through the walls. "You can't run, Elian. You were always meant to be mine. The protocol has always been about you, about what you are. You're part of this place now." He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block her out. "I'm not part of this," he muttered, his voice trembling. "I won't be. I'm not like you." But her words still crawled into his thoughts, worming their way into every crack, every fissure in his mind. "You think you can fight me? We are the same. We were always the same." The ground beneath him rumbled, a deep groaning sound like the entire Archive was shifting its weight. The walls flickered and warped, jagged slashes of light cutting through the dark. Something was happening. Something was changing. "Elian, we don't have much time." Nyx's voice snapped him back to reality. She had stopped ahead, looking down at a control panel embedded in the wall. It was covered in alien symbols and shifting glyphs that glowed with an unnatural light. His breath hitched as he caught up with her. "What is this?" "This is the entry point to the Nexus," she said, her fingers flying over the interface. "If we can breach the security protocols here, we'll have access to the core systems. That's where we'll find the central nodes that control the Archive's stability. If we can take those down, we can weaken her connection to the Archive. We can shut it down." Elian didn't respond. He wasn't sure if he fully understood what she meant, but the desperation in her voice was enough to make him trust her. His eyes scanned the shifting panels, watching the glyphs twist and shimmer as if they were alive. Like the Archive was watching them, testing them, waiting for them to make a mistake. "Make a mistake." Ilara's voice again, a sneer of cold disdain. "You think you can stop me? You'll never escape me. We are bound together. Forever." His hands shook as he reached for Nyx's shoulder, his fingers tightening. "What if we can't do this? What if she—" You can't stop me, Elian. You're mine now. I'm not yours, Elian shouted, the words escaping before he could stop them. A blast of energy pulsed through the room as if his defiance had triggered a response from the archive itself. The walls around them buckled, warping like melting plastic, and the air grew thick with a low, oppressive hum. Nyx flinched, her fingers flying over the control panel with renewed urgency. Focus, Elian. We're almost there. But the ground shook violently now. The archive was fighting back. The walls trembled like a dying animal, and the light from the glyphs flared and faded in chaotic bursts. The very structure of the archive seemed to be coming apart, unraveling at the seams. It was as though Ilara's control was beginning to fracture, just as his resistance was. We can't stop this, Elian said, his voice faltering. It's too late. No. Nyx's voice was sharp, commanding, unwavering. It's never too late. We are the ones who decide how this ends. We control the protocol, and we're not going to let her turn us into one of them. Her fingers slammed down on the interface, and the walls around them groaned in protest. For a brief, terrifying moment, Elian thought the entire archive would collapse. But then something shifted. A bright, blinding pulse of light erupted from the control panel, surging through the room in a shockwave. Elian stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing as the force of it blasted through him. The air crackled with energy, and then, as quickly as it had come, the light faded. The room was silent, but it was a silence that felt different. Elian blinked, trying to clear the spots from his vision. The walls were still shifting, but now the pulse of the archive's heartbeat seemed weaker. The oppressive weight that had been pressing on his chest, the feeling that Ilara's consciousness was everywhere, began to fade just a little, and in the distance he thought he heard something. A scream, far away but unmistakable. Ilara's scream. You've done it, Elian thought, the words ringing in his mind. They had made a crack, a fissure in the system, and for the first time it felt like there might be a way out. The pulse of energy had come and gone in an instant, leaving Elian's ears ringing, his skin tingling with a residual charge. The archive's walls were no longer a living, breathing organism. They had become something more like ruins. The dark, oppressive architecture that had once been so suffocating now felt brittle, like an ancient structure starting to crumble under the weight of its own age. For a moment, the quiet was almost peaceful. But Elian knew better. The calm before the storm never lasted. The archive was still a living thing, and Ilara, her presence, was far from gone. What did we do? Elian breathed, his voice raw and shaky. He could still feel the lingering echo of the pulse in his bones, the tremor of something vast and ancient. But it was different now. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something had changed. Something irreversible had happened. We didn't just trigger the system, Nyx said, her voice tight with both exhaustion and something else, something like awe. She stood over the control panel, still aglow with the fading remnants of that pulse, her fingers trembling as they hovered just above the interface. We breached its core. We've destabilized it. Elian took a step closer to her, his eyes scanning the dim surroundings, now distorted and faintly shimmering as though a veil had been pulled from the environment. The walls of the archive now felt like they were made of glass, thin, fragile, cracking in places as they splintered with the force of their disruption. "I don't think it's just destabilized," Elian muttered, his gaze flicking to the far corners of the chamber. There were flickers now, small ripples of light and shadow, as if the archive itself was losing its cohesion. The structure trembled not from the outside, but from within. It felt like the entire system was collapsing under the pressure of its own weight. "You were right," Nyx said, turning to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were focused. "This is it. We've started the process. The archive is coming undone." A cold chill ran down Elian's spine. "How long do we have?" Nyx's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't know, but we need to move fast. It won't take long before the collapse accelerates. We've triggered a cascade event. The central nexus is destabilizing. The system will bleed out, but it's going to take everything with it." Elian swallowed hard, the weight of their actions sinking in. There was no turning back. Whatever had been done to the archive could not be undone. If they didn't act fast, everything they knew and more would be consumed in the unraveling. "Where do we go now?" Elian asked, voice tense. He could already feel the ground beneath them beginning to shake, a deep rumble that seemed to come from the very core of the archive. The air was growing thick with static, crackling and charging with energy. "The nexus is close," Nyx replied, her voice low. "But the path's going to be harder to reach now. The system will fight back. Ilara won't let us leave without a final push." As if on cue, the walls groaned in protest, the once fluid shapes of the archive now violently twisting and warping. The air around them seemed to pulse with a deep, foreboding hum, a sound that reminded Elian of the sound of a heart slowing its beat, weakening, fading. But it wasn't just the archive that was faltering. "It's her," Elian realized. "Ilara's consciousness is linked to the system. The archive is collapsing, and so is she." A crackle of static filled the air, and Elian's skin prickled as if something was moving in the air itself. The very fabric of the archive was beginning to tear, small threads of corrupted data weaving their way through the room like broken lightning. Nyx was already moving, her eyes scanning the shifting environment as she pulled Elian forward. "Come on, we need to keep moving," she urged, her voice urgent. "We're running out of time." Elian followed her, his mind racing as the ground beneath their feet began to buckle. The walls seemed to shimmer in and out of existence, fragments of memory and data clashing together in flashes. They moved quickly, ducking and weaving as the architecture of the archive shattered around them, warping into unrecognizable forms. Elian's breath came in sharp, ragged bursts as he tried to stay focused. But it was becoming harder. His mind felt foggy, as if the very system was trying to drag him under, force him to become part of the wreckage. A shadow loomed ahead, a flicker of movement in the chaos. Elian's heart skipped a beat. It was Ilara. Her figure appeared out of the fractured light, sharp and intense against the disintegrating walls. Her presence seemed to warp the very space around her, her form shifting and distorting with each step. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, Her face twisted in a mocking smile. She wasn't human anymore. Not in any sense Elian could recognize. "You think you've won, Elian?" Ilara's voice came, dripping with venom, her words echoing through the crumbling space like 1,000 whispers. The distortion in her voice was unnerving, as if her very essence was being pulled apart by the collapse. "You can't escape. The protocol was never about us. It was about this, about me. And you will be a part of it." The ground shuddered beneath their feet, and Elian instinctively reached for Nyx's hand, feeling the cold burn of her grip as she pulled him closer. "She's not real," Nyx hissed, her voice barely audible over the growing storm. "She's the archive now. She's just data." "No," Ilara's voice came again, sharp and splitting. "I am the archive. This is who I've become. You'll never be free of me. We will always be bound together. Your mind, your soul are mine." The air around them crackled, and Elian felt a sharp pain stab through his head, a jolt that sent his knees buckling. He could feel her again, Ilara's presence in his mind, curling like a snake, squeezing tighter with every breath. Nyx's grip tightened on his arm, pulling him back to reality. "Focus, Elian, focus. She's not real. She can't control you if you don't let her." "I can't," Elian gasped, his mind drowning in the rush of fragmented memories, the weight of Ilara's words suffocating him. "She's in here, Nyx. I can feel her." "You can't let her win," Nyx said, her voice steady, but her eyes darkened with the weight of everything they had fought for. "This ends now. Now, Elian. We have to destroy the core." The pressure around them increased, the space becoming more unstable with every passing moment. Ilara's voice swirled in his mind like an insidious storm, but Nyx was right. This was the moment. This was their chance. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to focus on the sound of his own breath, on the steady thrum of his heartbeat. He could feel the presence of the archive trying to drag him under, but this time he didn't let it. The decision was his to make. He pushed forward past the distortion in his mind, past the weight of Ilara's presence. And then he spoke, his voice low and firm, the words a declaration of defiance. "I'm not yours." With that, he pushed himself to his feet, pulling Nyx along as they sprinted forward. The walls of the archive continued to crumble, and the ground beneath them shook violently, but they kept moving. They didn't stop. They couldn't. The nexus was just ahead. And once they reached it, they would have their chance. They would have their moment to end this, for good. But Ilara's voice echoed one last time through the chaos, a final chilling promise. "This isn't over, Elian. It's never over." The shaking didn't stop. The walls, once solid and structured, now buckled and bent, their surfaces warping like brittle paper in a storm. The lights flickered in erratic pulses, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own, slithering across the floor and up the walls. The air itself felt charged, thick with the static hum of the collapsing archive. Every step Elian took was like moving through a dream, a nightmare. He could feel the ground beneath him shifting, unstable, as if the entire archive was coming undone piece by piece. He barely noticed Nyx's hand in his anymore. Her grip was as much a lifeline as his own breath, anchoring him to this world as the rest of it seemed to dissolve into chaos. Her face was set, determined, but there was something in her eyes. a flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. Elian couldn't blame her. The archive had already claimed so much and they were running out of time. "You're not ready." Ilara's voice rang out cold and clear as though she were speaking directly into their minds. It didn't matter how many walls they put up, how far they ran. Her presence was always there, a constant weight on their shoulders. Her voice had become a distant echo, but one with enough bite to make every nerve in Elian's body tense. His teeth clenched as they pushed forward, each step a battle. "We're ready," Elian muttered, though his words barely made it past his lips. They had no choice but to be ready. The archive's core, the Nexus, was within their grasp, and if they could just reach it, they could end this. Destroy the protocol. Shatter Ilara's hold on the system, on everything. "Focus, Elian," Nyx urged, her voice cutting through the chaos. Her eyes never left the path ahead, scanning the fractured environment for any new threat. Her pace had quickened, and Elian matched her step for step, despite the growing pressure in his chest, the weight of Ilara's influence still pressing in from every angle. But it wasn't just Ilara's voice that threatened to drown him. It was the archive itself. The very essence of it, now unraveling, was reaching for him, for Nyx. It wanted to pull them in, to bind them to its decaying structure, to become part of its eternal rot. "We don't have much time," Nyx said again, her voice tight, her breath ragged. She was fighting to keep her composure just as much as he was. They had both been running on fumes for what felt like forever. "It's gonna collapse before we get there if we don't move faster." The Nexus was close, so close now that Elian could feel its pulse. The hum of data, once crisp and cold, now thrummed in chaotic waves distorted by the impending collapse. The structure of the archive was folding in on itself, creating jagged paths where once there had been order. Elian could hear distant cracks echoing through the air, the sound of the very walls splintering under pressure. And then, there it was. The Nexus. It wasn't like he expected. It wasn't a room or a central hub. It wasn't a physical place at all. It was a presence, a massive core of light and data hanging in the space before them like a living, breathing organism, its tendrils reaching out into every crack, every corner of the archive. The Nexus pulsed with raw energy, the center of everything, its energy both comforting and horrifying in its power. The moment Elian laid eyes on it, he knew. This was where the protocol had originated. This was the heart of Ilara's creation. This was where everything that had gone wrong had begun, and where it would all end. "It's beautiful," Nyx breathed, staring at the shimmering core. But her voice was laced with more than awe. It was filled with something else, something darker. But it's also terrifying. Elian didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the Nexus, his mind suddenly clearer than it had been in days. The final decision was right here, right now. They had reached the heart of the archive, but so had Ilara. The system, it seemed, wasn't ready to let them destroy it just yet. Elian stepped forward, the ground beneath him groaning in protest. The Nexus flickered, and the core's light seemed to intensify, growing more intense with every step he took. The walls behind them distorted, stretched, and warped like rubber. A tendril of dark data shot out from the Nexus, snaking toward them with predatory speed. Elian could feel the sharp, icy sting of it before it even touched him. the sensation of being pulled, of his mind being sucked back into the archive's void. He fought against it, pushing forward with every ounce of strength he had left. Nyx, too, fought to stay by his side, her hands slipping from his as the tendrils reached for them. There was no room for hesitation now. It was either the Nexus or the Archive, and if they didn't make it, Ilara would win. "Elian, go!" Nyx shouted, shoving him forward with all her strength. The data tendril caught her mid-movement, wrapping around her arm like cold steel. She screamed, the sound echoing as the tendrils of corrupted data began to pull her in, dragging her away from him. "Nyx!" Elian's voice cracked, but he didn't hesitate. He couldn't. Not now. With one final push, he reached the core of the Nexus. The light around him was blinding now, the force of it almost unbearable. He could feel it, its presence, the way it throbbed with power, with purpose. Everything in him told him to stop, to surrender to the will of the Nexus, to give in to the protocol, but he wouldn't, not anymore. With one final breath, Elian reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the core. A shock of energy ran through him, a jagged lightning-like current that split through his chest and shot up to his skull. He screamed, the world around him splitting apart as the very fabric of the archive twisted, buckled, and cracked. And then, just as it felt like everything would break, Elian's mind snapped. A flood of images, memories rushed forward. Ilara, her face, her voice, the protocol, the archive. It's time to end it. Elian didn't think. He acted. The protocol had been built on an illusion, on the lie that the archive needed to exist, that Ilara needed to be its master. But the archive was nothing without its users, and Elian had learned the truth deep in his heart. They could live without it. He reached deeper into the Nexus, his mind uniting with it in a singular moment of clarity. He shattered the core, pulled it apart, disrupted its connection to Ilara, to everything. The light around him flared one final time, blinding in its intensity, and then just as quickly everything went dark. For a long moment there was only silence. Elian's breath came in ragged gasps as the darkness pressed in. He could no longer feel the weight of the archive, the weight of Ilara's presence on his shoulders. It was gone. She was gone. The Nexus was no more. And then he heard something, a voice, weak but familiar. "Elian." Nyx's voice. "Elian, wake up!"